good morning, everyone. My name is Linda Melky, and today I'm going to show you how I made this quilt. It's scrappy all the way. If you haven't already subscribed, give me a thumbs up and subscribe. I am making scrappy quilts all the time.
When I was a kid, I used to come home from school and my mom would be watching a show on TV about cooking. She loved to watch the cooking shows on TV. One of her favorites was um, The Galloping Gourmet, and another one was Emerald Lagasse. And she just loved when they would kick it up a notch. Bam! These kick it up a notch. Just can't imagine how happy I am with the result of these squares.
The last time I made something, I used my 6½ inch squares. These are all cut squares that I have made from scrap fabrics whenever I have leftovers, and I have them in a bin. So the last one I made was the drunkard's path, and it was circles, and I used 6½ inch squares to make the circles. This time I'm doing something a little different. Pinwheels. And what I'm picking out of the bin are brightly colored, patterned, big motifs, little motifs, things that are really hard to use by themselves because they're going to get cut up and used. See, things like those are going to be harder to use in a scrap quilt. In my opinion, I find them harder to use. But in this quilt, I'm just going to pick out all the bright things and pick out all the colorful things and put them together and make a quilt. So I think this quilt is going to, bam, kick it up another notch. These things don't look so fancy all by themselves, but when you take a dark one and a light one, 6½ inch, and place them one on top of the other, so all the way around the edge, just using the 1/4 inch guide, so all the way around the edge. Here's one that I've done. Then I take a ruler and from corner to corner, I cut one way and then I cut the other way. And what I get are half square triangles, 4 of them the same size. And I press the seam allowance to the dark side for all of them. Press the seam allowances. And then to make life easier, then I take my square up ruler, and if I've done it with my 6½ inch squares, and I make my sew around the outside, do the diagonal cuts, these will square up using my ruler to 4 inches. And that's what I want. 4 inches with the seam allowances all pressed. And then what I do, voila, I've got a wall full of pinwheels that are bright and exciting and lots of color. You wouldn't believe the things that are buses, bananas, I've got wrenches, there's peppers, There's steering wheels and cars and little kitty toys and fruit, chicken legs. Everything that you can imagine is in there. These blocks measure 7.5 inches. 7.5 inches. So I started off with 6.5 inch squares. I made 4 half square triangles, sewed them into a pinwheel, and now these blocks are 7.5 inches. Perfect. So I'm favoring alternate blocks right now. It's fun to put something different here rather than all the quilt being the same pattern. That would be too bright and too bold and too chaotic, in my opinion. So here now I have a dilemma. So I have seen recently quite a few quilts that have got scraps in a diagonal, like this is going to be in a diagonal, scraps. And what people have been doing is an alternate block where one half is one color and the other half is another color. But to do that, in this case, I would want to have every left-hand side dark, every right-hand side red in all of these spaces, and I would want to have them all the same color and the same pattern. Now, for me, that means cutting virgin fabric, buying something that is lots of yardage so I can cut squares, cut them in half, and have consistency for all of these squares that I'm going to be making. That's not my style. I don't like to go out and buy something when I don't really need to. So I've discarded this idea, and what I'm going to do is use some of the squares that I've already cut. Now, the ones that are up here are 6.5. So what I'm going to do is put a square of fabric in the center of each of these block spaces. And I went to my 6-inch bin because I know it's going to be all right. And I have a 6-inch bin of cut squares, all kinds of colors. I picked out bright colors. So I'm going to take a bright color and put it in the center of each of these blocks. They're all different colors, but they're bright colors. Now, you see there's a problem, isn't there? I'll move out of your way and you can see what the problem is. These are 6-inch squares. These are 7.5 inch squares. But when I started putting them up on the wall in between the pinwheels, I thought, this little strip of white background really makes these things pop. Like Emerald Agasse, let's knock it out of the park and up another notch. So what I'm going to do is sew a little strip of white fabric around each of these alternate blocks to up the size of this 6-inch block so that it's 7 1/2 inches like these are. And then I'm going to put that block in between all of these pinwheels. And I'm going to work away at them one by one. In the meantime, here's a little bit of chain piecing. This is how I did the pinwheel blocks. I sewed around the outside, then cut them into quarters, and then I just chain pieced all those 4 pieces together so that I got the pinwheels. It didn't take very much time, and it was just an easy peasy thing to do. Chain piecing is the way to go when you've got lots of blocks and lots of repetition. Now to trim it and press them all. And once these are sewed together, they really don't need trimming after this. They are 7 1/2 inches. Likewise, when I'm sewing around the 6-inch squares, I use a 1 1/2 inch strip of white fabric. And I can also cut these 1 1/2 inch strips from scraps because they are short. They're only about 6 1/2 to 7 1/2 inches long. If I have some scraps that are longer than that, I can cut and do a bit of chain piecing. But most of the little white strips are about 8 inches long and cut from bits and pieces left over from other quilts. When I have all of my pieces cut, I then will just square up this little square to 7 1/2 inches so that it matches the pinwheels. And once I have these squares finished, I start putting them up on my wall in between the pinwheels, and then I can just move them around a little bit until I am satisfied with the color combinations. Around the edges of the quilt, I cut these squares in half crosswise once, and a half square fills in the little pieces at the end. And I take one of these squares with the white around the edge to make the corner block. And one square cut into 4 pieces makes the corner block for the entire quilt. So as you can see, here I'm still busy working at my color combinations. Some bright, some light, some colorful, some dark. There are all kinds of things in this quilt. And it's turning out to be quite a colorful thing. It will be quilted in one piece. I will get a piece of backing for the entire thing, and then I'll be happy with this quilt. I hope you have enjoyed watching the process of making this quilt, and I hope if you did like it, you give me a thumbs up. If you have questions, ask me questions. I'm always happy to answer the questions. So until next time, bye-bye.